It started with a scream that nobody heard, not in the woods, not behind the broken glass of the farmhouse, not even in the bloodline that had long forgotten what guilt felt like. They were so far removed from the world that their sins had become habits and their crimes traditions. Her name doesn't appear in any census, not in any hospital record, not in any school ledger. For nearly a decade she didn't legally exist, but her uncle did. He was known, loved even, by the neighbors who never asked why no one ever came out of that house except him. In Appalachia, there are valleys so steep the sun vanishes by afternoon. It's in one of those shadowed cradles where this family dug in, deep like a tick under skin. The Hawthorne name was once respected, a proud homestead, but by the 1960s it had rotted from the inside, and like most decay, no one wanted to smell it until it spilled out. She was born to a mother who was already too familiar with her brother. A girl who hadn't finished high school, who didn't have a driver's license, and who kept her pregnancy secret with the help of the man who caused it, her brother. The child was delivered in a cellar, no midwife, no doctor, just a mattress, rusted scissors, and a pair of trembling hands. They named her Elise, but only between themselves, because to the world she was a secret. And secrets in families like this don't grow up, they grow inward. Elise never left the house, never saw a doctor, never had a birthday cake. Her days were spent between four walls stained with more than just age. Her first words were muffled by her uncle's belt. Her first steps were away from a door she'd never get to open. And by the time she was 11, she was already carrying a child of her own. The Hawthorne property sat 3 miles from the nearest gravel road, down a hollow choked with vines and rust. Mail didn't come there. Electricity was spotty. The only consistent thing was silence and the fear it covered. Neighbors, if you could call them that, sometimes said they'd see one porch light flicker on after midnight. They joked it was haunted. They weren't wrong. Inside that house, the air was thick with sweat and secrets. Elise wasn't treated like a child, she was treated like something owed, a possession, a curse passed down and kept hidden. Her uncle, who also happened to be her father, called her his girl when he was drunk. When sober, he didn't call her anything at all, just pointed or grunted or reached for his belt. There were no mirrors in the house. Her mother said they invited spirits, but it wasn't superstition, it was shame. Elise didn't know what she looked like until she caught her reflection in a cracked window pane one morning. Sunlight had hit her face for maybe the first time in years. She didn't recognize the girl staring back, pale, wild-haired, with eyes too old for her body, like a ghost, half-formed, desperate to leave. At night, the voices came through the floorboards, groans, whimpers, pleas. Elise tried to close her ears, but it never worked. The cries always sounded like her mother's voice, and then one day they just stopped. Her mother died in the summer of 1974. Elise was 12. The official story was infection from bad teeth, but no one signed the death certificate. There was no autopsy, just a shallow grave behind the barn and a cross carved into a pine board. And now Elise was alone, no mother to stand between her and the man who both raised and ruined her. He didn't cry, didn't speak, just dragged the mattress down to the basement and locked the door behind them. Most families bury their past. This one kept it alive, kept it fed, bruised and chained in the dark. There are wounds you can't see on a body. They grow like mold behind the eyes, rotting something essential. By 13, Elise didn't speak unless spoken to. Her voice had become brittle from disuse, and when it did emerge, it was soft, childlike, eerily calm. Too calm for someone with a child inside her. Yes, her uncle, her father, had taken her again, and this time it stuck. No hospital, no records, just blood and bone and something breaking inside her as the pregnancy took hold. She slept on the floor, shivering in the basement as rats ran across her bare feet. The only heat came from a kerosene lamp her uncle lit when he came down. He'd sit for hours watching her, drinking from a jar of clear liquid that stank like poison. Sometimes he'd speak, not kindly, just words, muttered prayers, pieces of a broken mind trying to convince itself it was righteous. God made Eve for Adam, he'd say, rocking in his chair. He made women to serve. That's how it's always been in this house. And Elise, too scared to respond, just nodded, not in agreement, but in survival. By the time the baby came, Elise had stopped crying. She gave birth alone. No one held her hand. No one whispered that it would be okay. It wasn't. The child was born blue, twisted, limbs curled the wrong way, skin blotched and thin like wax paper. It never made a sound. She wrapped it in a sheet and laid it in a shoebox. Her uncle buried it next to her mother, didn't speak a word, just patted the dirt down with a shovel and went back inside. That night he brought her supper. He called her sweetheart. But Elise wasn't a child anymore. Not really. Something had hardened inside her. A flame so dim it almost died. But it didn't. It waited. It watched. Every splintered stair, every unlocked drawer, every moment his back was turned. She'd learned silence. Now she was learning patience. Because even in the most poisoned bloodlines, there are moments, rare, fragile moments, when horror begins to breed resistance. He began to age, not visibly at first, but in his habits. His hands trembled when he lit his cigarettes. His steps grew slower, more uncertain, and Elise noticed. She watched the way he napped longer each afternoon, the way his breathing wheezed at night. Decay had finally come for him, not as justice, but as time, and for the first time in her life, Elise saw something close to possibility. She began to test the edges of her cage, quietly, methodically. She learned the pattern of the door locks, counted the seconds it took for him to fall asleep after a drink, found a loose panel behind the cellar wall where old tools had been left to rust. One night, she took a claw hammer and tucked it under a pile of rags, just in case. The next morning, she woke up before him, and for reasons she still couldn't explain, she walked past the door and into the woods, not to escape, not yet, just to remember what it was like to breathe air that didn't taste like mildew and shame. It was a mistake. He found her by the creek less than an hour later, dragged her by the hair back to the house, locked her in the cellar. No light, no food, for 3 days. But something in her didn't break this time. It was the opposite. While trapped in that dark, she whispered to herself every secret he ever told her, every wound, every memory. She etched it into her mind like scripture. She swore she would remember it all, not out of loyalty, but out of defiance. Because if the world ever learned what happened in that house, maybe it would be forced to look. Maybe it wouldn't turn away this time. And when the door finally opened, she didn't flinch. She just stared at him, quiet, steady, like she'd seen the devil up close and realized he was only a man. He didn't like that look. He hit her, hard, split her lip. But Elise didn't cry. Something had shifted. The hunted was learning how to wait, how to watch, how to become the hunter. By the time she turned 16, Elise had stopped being afraid. Not because the danger was gone, but because it had become familiar, predictable, and predictability is a kind of power. Her uncle still controlled the house, the food, the locks, but Elise now controlled herself. He noticed it too, how she held his gaze longer, how she didn't shrink from his touch, but didn't welcome it either, just stared through him like he was already dead. It unsettled him, And in men like him, fear makes them crueler. That winter, the beatings got worse. He called it correction. He said she was getting uppity, said it was her mother's blood in her making her wicked. But Elise knew the truth. He was losing control, and it terrified him. Then something happened, no one expected. A hunter, an outsider, got lost near the ridge and wandered close to the Hawthorne property. He knocked on the door, looking for directions. Elise answered it. She stood in the doorway, bruised, barefoot, with a blank expression that barely concealed the scream in her eyes. The man paused, looked over her shoulder, saw the shadow moving behind her. Her uncle came to the door, smiling, told the man everything was fine, offered him coffee. The man declined quickly, walked off, but he didn't forget. 3 weeks later, 2 sheriff's deputies arrived. The house was clean, too clean. Elise wore a dress. Her uncle acted like a concerned father. "She's just shy," he said. "Lost her mama young. Don't like strangers." Elise said nothing, and just like that, they left. Because in places like that, forgotten corners of America where poverty and pride grow like weeds, nobody wants to pull back the curtain. It's easier to pretend the smell is from mold, not rot. But something had shifted. Elise saw it. There were cracks now. People were beginning to notice. All she had to do was wait. She returned to the basement that night and took out the claw hammer. She didn't use it, not yet, but she kept it close, because eventually the world was going to stop looking away. It didn't happen with screaming. There was no fire, no gunshot, no dramatic escape under the cover of night. The end came, like most things in that house, in silence. Elise woke one morning to find her uncle sitting at the kitchen table, slumped forward, eyes wide, lips parted. A dried line of spit curled down his chin. His skin was grey, the mason jar beside him still half full. Heart failure. Or maybe the liquor finally did what no one else could. She didn't check. She didn't call anyone. She watched him for 2 hours, just sat across from the body that had caged her, twisted her, made her forget what being human felt like. She watched to make sure he didn't move, and then, slowly, she stood. She didn't cry. Instead, she went upstairs, looked into the one mirror left in the house. The glass was cracked, dusty, but her face stared back. Older than it should have been, scarred but still alive. That was when she realized she didn't need to run. She'd already outlived him. The days that followed were strange, still, almost peaceful. She buried the body herself, didn't mark the grave, didn't say a word. Then she went through the house, every drawer, every closet, every hidden compartment in the floorboards. She found photo albums, old, yellowed pictures of her mother as a child, then even older ones, black and white portraits of unfamiliar faces with familiar features, men who looked too much like her uncle, women who had that same vacant stare, pages and pages of inbreeding documented in photographs and names, births that never got recorded, deaths that no one mourned. A family tree, but every branch curled inward like a noose. She packed what she could into a suitcase, took the claw hammer and left it on the kitchen table. Then she stepped outside, for real this time. Walked down the dirt path, past the barn, past the graves, through the vines, through the hay hollow, until she reached the road. And when a passing car finally stopped and rolled down the window, the driver asked if she was lost. She said, "No, I'm going home." But no one, not even Elise, knew where that was yet. Elise was 17 when she stepped into town. She didn't have ID, no money, no last name she wanted to say out loud, just scars and silence. People stared, not because they knew, but because they didn't. She looked like something that didn't belong, like something dragged from a storm and left on the pavement. A church took her in at first. Then a nurse noticed the way she flinched at loud voices, how she couldn't sit with her back to a door. Slowly, Pieces came out. Not in words, but in reactions. In her refusal to change clothes unless the lights were off. In her nightmares, screamed through walls too thin to hold them. Eventually, someone asked the right question, and Elise answered it. Not all of it, not at once, but enough. The authorities investigated. They found the house, found the graves, the bones in the shoebox, the photographs, the journals in the attic that belonged to her uncle, filled with rambling sermons about purity and blood, handwritten confessions masked as scripture, pages that blurred incest and salvation as if the two belonged together. It took months to sort through it, years really, and the public never heard the whole truth, too disturbing, too grotesque, too shameful. But Elise didn't care. She changed her name, moved states, got a job in a library. She liked the quiet, the smell of old pages, the weight of forgotten things being remembered. Some days she'd catch herself staring at the children who came in with their parents, laughing, loud, unafraid. It made something in her ache, not with envy, but with something colder, a kind of mourning for the girl she never got to be. She never married, never had children. She said she couldn't trust what was in her blood. But she spoke, sometimes, quietly, when she saw someone flinch like she used to, when she noticed the same bruises hidden behind sleeves, she'd say, "You can leave." Why? "I don't have to stay, even if it's your family." Because she knew now that blood is not sacred, that some bloodlines are curses, some roots need to be torn out completely. And somewhere in a dusty archive few people ever visit, there's a sealed file with her name, the one she chose,